Let me start over then. Good evening. What would I do without you? Tonight will be, this is fun. This is going to be extremely fun for me because I have an echo in my headphones. So I think it's going to be creepier for me because I have this horrible echo. Terrifying. We're going to be reading selections from author, tragic poet, Edgar Allen Poe. Not all of this. It's a lot. But some. And I'm just gonna deal with the echo. But we're gonna begin now. Happy Halloween. And we'll start off with a poem. Actually, I should lay the ground rules. So I have chat going on. I have to move that up there. I won't be responding to chat while I'm reading, but in between, naturally. And there'll be bathroom breaks and stuff. Like, you don't have to worry. I'm not worried. I'm a little worried about the echo. Actually, might do that. Okay, that's a little better. It's like what professional streamers do, right? Okay. We'll be starting with a poem. A good one. Poem from 1849. Annabelle Lee. Thank you. Thank you, babe. All right. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabelle Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. She was a child and I was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabelle Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long, long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud by night, chilling my Annabelle Lee, so that our high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of a cloud, chilling and killing my Annabelle Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than love of those who were older than we, of many fair and wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabelle Lee, and the stars never rise but I see the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life, and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the side of the sea. And we're off. It is, I'm going to admit, this is a bit hard with the echo. I'm not going to lie. And I feel like it makes me read at a little slower pace. You know what I can do? I can turn down the volume on my headset so I can actually listen to myself. Oh, can you still hear me? If you're still there, let me know. If not, then that's not a good plan. But moving on to a story. Brilliant. Oh, thank goodness. Technology, man, I tell you. Poe never had to deal with this. Probably. So this is a wonderful collection, by the way. It's complete tales and poems by Edgar Allen Poe. It has an introduction by Arthur Hobson Quinn. There's also notes and things like that. 1992 is when this came out. So let's go on to a story, shall we? I also, as this goes on throughout the night, I probably would do this for a couple hours. Maybe take some, maybe take some suggestions. Maybe something I haven't read in a very long. I don't think I've read everything. He wrote a lot, but there are a few that I do want to read, and I think I'm going to start out with one of my favorites. And Vincent Price adapted, The Masque of the Red Death. Here's the other thing, because I haven't read these in so long. If I mispronounce something or can stumble over my word, I am not a professional reader. So you're just gonna have to let it go. Masque of Red Death. That's where we're going. And based on when I've listened to this, it's like 15 to 20 minutes, so if you want to take a break now, that's fine. Masque of the Red Death. The Red Death has long devastated the country. No petulance had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest's ban which shut him out of the aid from the sympathy of his fellow man, and the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to deep seclusion one of his castled abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A structure and lofty wall gilded in it. The walls had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or the frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might, defiance to contagion, the external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve, to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these, security from within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball, the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7. An imperial suite, in many palaces, however. Such suites from long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the wall on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn every 20 or 30 yards, and each could turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon the closed corridor which perused the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at an eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, and the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon the carpet at the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of these 7 apartments were there any lamp or candelabrum. Amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from the lamp or candle within this suite of the chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier fire, that projected its rays through tinted glass, and so glaringly illuminated the room, and thus were produced the multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its presence all. It was in this apartment, also, that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there was from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of no particular a note, and that emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performances, to hearken to the sounds, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows, as if in a confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly, and the musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness and folly, and made whispered vows to each other, and the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embrace 3,600 seconds, as the time flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and there was the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But, in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed, in great part, the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great fete, that in his own guiding taste, which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. They were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm. But of what has been, since, in Hanani, there were arabesque figures and unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps, and anon there strikes the ebony clock, which stands the halled velvet, and then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now and again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro, and more merrily than ever, taking hue from many of the tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But the chamber which lies most westwardly, the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sabre-drape appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sabre-table, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly empathetic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirling on until the length of the commenced sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers and the music ceased, and they were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all those before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations and thoughtful among those who relieved. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence, having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise, and then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well suppose that no ordinary appearance could have excited such a sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the heart of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death were equally just, there were matters that no jest could be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and beating of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet, All this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, were bespeckled with scarlet horror. When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain the role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded honestly to the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern and blue chamber in which stood Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout 7 rooms, loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where he stood, the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of the group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which he had mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none to put forth a hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms and the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step that he had distinguished from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of deadly terror that seized upon them all. He bore aloft the drawn danger, and had approached in rapid impetuously to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and a dagger dropped gleaming on the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterward fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and, seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony cloak, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave encampments at the corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent rudeness, untainted by the tangible form, and now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in their blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went on the last of the gay, and the flames in the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. It's The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. A great good tale. Prospero, though, am I right? Like, you just, what are you doing? On to a happier story. This one's got animals. The black cat. I should trigger warning if you have an issue with harm to animals, you might want to skip this one. I love animals and pets, and I can do this, but that's me. So for the faint of heart, maybe sit this one out. Viewer discretion advised. Listener discretion advised. And now, the black cat. For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I'm about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad am I not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburthen my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many, they will seem less terrible than Baroque's. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found, which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace. Some intellect, more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which perceive in the circumstance I detail with awe nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and my manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have had a cherished affection for a faithful and a sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature of the intense gratification thus derivable. There's something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him, and who has frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere men. I married early, and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black, and sagacious to the astonishing degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusions to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon the point, and I mention the matter all for no better reason than it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto. This was the cat's name, my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me whenever I went to the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language with my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me. For what disease is like alcohol? And at length even Pluto, who is now becoming old, and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill. One night, returning home, much intoxicated, from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him when in his fright at my violence he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder, while I pen the damnable atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse, for the crime of which I had been guilty. But it was at best a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by the evident dislike on the part of the creature which had so once loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation. And then came, as to my final radical overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of the spirit of philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one that indivisible primary faculties or sentiments, which could give direction to the character of man. Who has not, 100 times, found himself committing a vile or a silly action for no other reason than because he knows that he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination, in the teeth of our best judgment, to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it is to be such? The spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue to finally consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cool blood, I slipped a noose about the neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse at my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin, a deadly sin, that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful, the most terrible God. On the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up. I resigned myself, therefore, to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts, and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins, the walls, which one exception had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had there, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall was a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The words strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as the graven bas-relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as anything less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in the garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, the garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by some, one of whom the animal that must have been cut from this tree and thrown through the open window into my chamber. This had probably been done with the view of rousing me from my sleep, and falling the other walls had compressed this victim of my cruelty in the substance of this freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. Although I thus readily accounted for my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented for another pet of the same species and somewhat similar appearance with which to supply its place. And one night, as I sat, half stupefied, and then in more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object reposing upon the head of the immense hogsheads of gin or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I'd been looking steadily at the top of the hogshead for some minutes, which now caused me surprise that was the fact that no sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I was at once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim of it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caress, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once, and it became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature. A certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty prevented me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence as from the breath of its pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred for the beast was the discovery, on the morning after I brought it home, that, like Pluto, it had also been deprived one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I've already said, possessed, in a high degree, that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait, and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinency which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Wherever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring up on my knees, covering me with its loathsome carcass. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its long and sharp claws in my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At some times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. The dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I'm almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I'm almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair, of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and for which a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had at length assumed a rigorous distinction of an outline, and it was now the representation of an object that I shuddered to name, and for this, above all, I loathed and I dreaded, and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, and I say, the image of a hideous and ghastly thing, the gallows. Oh, mournful and terrible engine of horror and crime, of agony and death And now I was indeed wretched beyond wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me, a man fashioned in this image of the high God, so much insufferable woe. Alas! Neither by day nor by night I knew a blessing of rest any more. During the form of the creature left me no moment alone. In the latter I stirred hourly dreams unutterable fear to find hot breath in the thing upon my face, in its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these feeble remnants of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden frequent and ungovernable outbursts of fury to which I had now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and most patient of the sufferers. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our property compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe, and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a fatal blow at the animal, which, of course, would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into this rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, with entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period, I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for in it the floor by the cellar. Again, I deliberated about the casting on the wall in the yard, about packing it in a box as if merchandise, with the usual arrangements, so getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than any other of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. For a purpose such as this cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection, caused by a false chimney, or fireplace, that had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the whole up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position, while with little trouble I relaid the whole structure as originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, hair, with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over to the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care, and I looked around triumphantly, as I said to myself, "Here, at least, then, my labor has not been in vain." My next step was to look for the beast which had been the cause of so much wickedness. For I had at length firmly resolved myself to put it to death. Had I been able to meet it with the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which the absence of this detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus, for one night, at least, since its introduction to the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept, even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but, of course, nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon the future facility as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of police came, very unexpectedly, into the house and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in this inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me accompany them into their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third and fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not a muscle. My heart beat calmly, as one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say if but one word by the triumph, and to render doubly sure the assurance of my guiltiness. "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all the health and a little more courtesy. By and by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house." In the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. "I may say, an excellently well-constructed house. These walls... Are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together, and here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane. I held my hand upon the very portion of the brickwork behind the wall stood the corpse of my wife on my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the arch-fiend. No sooner than had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb. By a cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing shriek, half a horror and half a triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony and the demons that exult in their damnation. Of my own thoughts it was folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For the instant the party of the stairs remained motionless, though the extremity of terror and awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already gently decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I walked the monster up within the tomb. I walled the monster up within the tomb, rather. The end of that story. The black cat. Don't wall things up. Thank you, Simon. Yes. Yeah, it's not just madness for this one. I mean, it is. But it was drinking for a bit. At least that's his excuse, right? Like, it's not. I just kept getting too drunk, and that's why I started to hate everything. I mean, the cat, you know. Yes. All right. We are going to take just a short intermission here. Man, I look with this red light. I'm just noticing this now. This is very Vincent Price thing I have going on right now. We're going to take just a short 5-10 minute intermission. You guys need to use the restroom or go hold your pets dearly. We'll return with at least one more story and one more poem. And I will see you guys momentarily. Streaming, am I right? Oh, it's such a dark and stormy night here, actually, where I'm at. It's almost perfect. So, welcome to Act 2 of 2. We're going to begin with another poem. Just need to find where it is. Thinking maybe not like a 6-page poem. Also, like, if you're wondering why I didn't pick these out ahead of time, you know? That's fair. So, I think I'll go with a classic Halloween. The Haunted Palace. A little earlier. 1839. Let me resume. No, accept. Can't really see the candle. There we go. Candle. The Haunted Palace. In the greenest of our valleys, by good angels tenanted, once a fair and stately palace, a radiant palace, reared its head. In the monarch thought's dominion it stood there, never seraph spread a pinion over fabric half so fair. Banners yellow, glorious, golden, on its roof did float and flow. All this, was in the olden time, long ago. In every gentle air that dallied in the sweet day, Along the ramparts, plumed and pallid, a winged odor went away. Wanderers in the happy valley, through two luminous windows saw spirits moving musically to a lute's well-tuned law. Round about the throne where sitting, Perphigony, in estate a glory well befitting, the ruler of the realm was seen. And all with pearl and ruby glowing was the fair palace door, through which came flowing, 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 and sparkling evermore, a troop of echoes, whose sweet duty was but to sing, in the voices of surpassing beauty, to wit and wisdom of their king. But evil things in robes of sorrow assailed the monarch's high estate. Ah, let us mourn, for never morrow shall dawn upon him desolate. And round about his home the glory that blushed and bloomed is but a dim remembered story of the told time entombed. And travellers now within that valley through the red-litten windows see vast forms that more fantastically to a discordant melody, while like a ghastly rapid river through the pale door a hideous throng rush out forevermore, and laugh but smile no more. 1839. Haunted Palace. That one's about monarchies. Or ourselves, whichever. And I do have the next story in mind. I do need to find it, because, he wrote a lot. And here it is. Another classic for this tonight. If you can guess, chat, what I'm about to read, you win. No, I'm just joking. You don't win. You can't win nothing. What am I talking about? Actually, maybe I'm overstating that. Folks' introduction to Poe. The Telltale Heart. So here we go. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allen Poe. True. Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been, and am. But why will you say that I am mad? This disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heavens and earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It's impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object? There was none. Passion? There was none. I loved the old man. He never wronged me. Never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye, with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of that eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch on his door, and I opened it oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, closed so that no light could shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me about an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well within the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon that vulture eye. And I did this for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye was always closed, so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would never have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves quicker than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my own sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feeling of triumph to think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed, suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened, through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily, steadily. I had my head in. I was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up from the bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quiet, quite still, and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. In the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I had done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches of the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not the groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it was welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he'd been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He'd been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It's merely a cricket which has made up its single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with its black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the obscene shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like a thread of a spider, shot from the crevice and fell upon that vulture eye. And it was wide, wide open. And I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it. It chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon that damned spot. And now I have not told you what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses. So now I say, there came to my ear a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of the drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain that ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder. I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now, the dead hour of night, amid this dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable a terror. Yet for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall, and at length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. Stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber, and deposited all between the scantings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. Tub had caught all that. When I made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock. Still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what I had now to fear, there entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity, as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by the neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged in the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, is my own, in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them, search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my own confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things, but ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached. I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. Ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness until at length I found that that noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently with a heightened voice. You hear the sound increase. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much as the sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath. Yet the officers heard it not. I had talked more quickly, more vehemently. The noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated upon the boards. But the noise arose over all the continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard. They suspected, they knew. And they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder, 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 villains! I shrieked, disassemble no more! I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here is the beating of his hideous heart. The end. Oh, you don't wall and board things up. Not mad, that guy. That's all right. All right. We're going to do a final thank you, Saithanan. Absolutely classic. One of, maybe my favorite of his tales. I think my first time reading it in a performative style. So, I don't know. But yeah, absolute classic. Get your here in chat out there. Alright. As promised. He keeps getting caught by the victim's corpses. Incompetent killer. It's true. You're not wrong. You know, there's no perfect crime. Oh, where are you? There we are. Right to it. Turned right to it. Really, before I get to this last one, I do want to thank you guys for tuning into this Halloween evening. This is a lot of fun for me, and I appreciate the company of good friends. But yes, we're ending the night with one last poem. Another classic, as Lisa Ben. This one from 1845, entitled, I'm sure you can guess, The Raven. Thank you. Thank you. I need it. This is what's going to make it or break it for me. All right. Edgar Allen Poe, The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over a many quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this and nothing more." Oh, distinctly I remember. It was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books a cease of sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whose angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. In the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to the still beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before, but the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, 'Lenore?' This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, 'Lenore?' Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. 'Surely,' said I, 'surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more.' Open here I flung the shutter, and with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mane of lord and lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven now, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore? Tell me, what thy lordly name is on this night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing a bird above his chamber door, bird or beast above, sculpted bust above the chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, and my hopes have flown before. And the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, Doubtless, said I, what it utters is only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, who, unmercifully disaster, followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore. To the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of nevermore. But the raven still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of the bird and bust and door, then upon that velvet sinking I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunted, ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed by an unseen censer swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this shone by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, bird or devil, by the heavens that he bend above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if, within this distant Aiden, it shall clasp a maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest of the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token that thy lie has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit thy bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. And that raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. That was The Raven by Edgar Allen Poe. And with that, I shall quit my form about this chamber. Not as good with the words as he is. This has been a thrill for me to do. I want to thank you again. Thank you very much, Simon. Yeah. couple slips, but so much fun to read. And this has been an absolute pleasure to do with you guys. So I want to wish you a very happy Halloween, a very safe night. You're right, it's a challenge, but I think that's what makes it fun. It's part of it. There's such a performative aspect to his writing that warrants a telling, as opposed to a simple reading. Yeah. Maybe I'll do this again. This was neat.